My grandmother used to say to me, "Baby, the world is full of invisible people, not ghosts, just folks that other folks have decided not to see." I never quite understood what she meant. Not until I heard this story. What I am about to share with you is not about revenge. It is not about the rich getting what they deserve or the poor rising up in triumph. No, friend. This is a story about something far more fragile. It is about dignity, about being seen, about what happens when we judge the book by its cover and miss the whole library inside. So, if you have a few minutes, maybe pour yourself a cup of coffee, settle into your favorite chair, and let me tell you about a woman named Thulani, a hotel called the Valerius, and a November afternoon that changed everything. The security guards appeared in less than a minute, 2 of them, broad shoulders, faces trained to show nothing. They positioned themselves on either side of her like marble statues, and the grand lobby of the Valerius Hotel fell into a hush so thick you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the far corner. Thulani did not move. She stood there beneath the portrait of Walter Valerius, the hotel's founder, her silver hair pinned back with an old ivory clip that had belonged to her mother. Her gray cardigan was worn thin at the elbows, soft from decades of washing, carrying that faint smell of lavender sachet and cedar chest. The leather shoes on her feet had seen better days. The heel on the left one had worn down at an angle from 40 years of standing tilted when she was lost in thought. Walter used to tease her about that. Said she looked like she was always listening for something no one else could hear. Around her, the whispers began. What is going on over there? Did somebody steal something? A man in a tailored suit, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, leaned toward his companion with the casual cruelty of someone who had never known want. Can you believe they let homeless people wander into a 5-star hotel? What is this place coming to? Homeless. The word drifted through the air like cigarette smoke, curling around Thulani, seeping into the spaces between her ribs. She heard it, but she did not lower her eyes. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and fresh magnolias. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a percolator burbled softly, the rich scent of coffee mixing with the flowers. The marble floor was cool even through the soles of her worn shoes. She had picked out this marble herself, 43 years ago, from a quarry in Vermont. She and Walter had driven up together in his old Ford pickup, arguing about colors the whole way. He had wanted gray, she had wanted cream. They had compromised on ivory with gray veins. She was standing on that compromise right now. "Ma'am." The hotel manager's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. His name was Alaric. Mid-40s, black suit pressed sharp enough to cut. He moved toward her with the click, click, click of polished shoes on stone. "I am going to ask you one more time. What are you hiding under your sweater?" Thulani looked at him. Really looked. Past the rigid jaw and the cold eyes, past the expensive haircut and the practiced authority, and she saw something there that most folks would have missed. His hands were trembling, just slightly, just enough. "I already told you," she said, her voice steady as still water. "It does not concern you." "I am afraid it does." Alaric took another step closer. The smell of his cologne was sharp, expensive, trying too hard. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will have no choice but to call the police." More whispers. Someone in the crowd actually clapped. A short, sharp sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Good. Get rid of her. People like that should not be allowed in places like this." Thulani heard every word. Each one landed like a small stone thrown at stained glass. And then, from the back of the crowd, a different voice. Small, shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Please, she did not do anything wrong." A young woman pushed her way forward, mid-20s. If that, Housekeeping uniform pressed but faded from too many washes. A stack of white towels clutched against her chest like armor. Her name tag read Grace. "I saw her," Grace said, her voice cracking but refusing to break. "She has been standing here for over an hour, just looking at that painting. She has not touched a thing. She has not bothered a soul. She was just standing there." Alaric turned on her, and his eyes went sharp as broken glass. "Grace, one more word and you are out of a job. Do you understand me?" The young woman froze. You could see the arithmetic happening behind her eyes. The rent coming due, the mother back home who needed her heart medication, the brother whose college tuition was only half paid. She swallowed hard. She took a step back. Thulani watched her retreat, and something softened in the old woman's weathered face. "It is all right, child," she said gently. "Go on now. I will be just fine." Alaric had reached the end of his patience. "Enough of this." He nodded at the security guards. "If she will not show us willingly, then we will have to see for ourselves." One of the guards stepped forward. His shadow fell across Thulani like a curtain closing. She raised her hand. "Wait." Her voice was not loud, but something in it made the guards stop dead, made the whole lobby hold its breath. "I will show you." Slowly, she reached into her cardigan. The crowd leaned in. A few phones appeared, though most folks just stared with their own eyes. The grandfather clock in the corner struck the half-hour, its chime ringing out like a church bell. And Thulani pulled out an hourglass. It was small, maybe 5 inches tall. The frame was carved from dark walnut wood, worn smooth by years of handling, intricate and old, but inside, instead of golden sand, there was something gray. Ash. The lobby went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of before. This was different. This was the silence of folks who suddenly realize they have stumbled onto holy ground. What is that?" Alaric asked. Thulani looked down at the hourglass cradled in her weathered hands, and for the first time those hands trembled. "This is my son." No one moved. No one breathed. "His name was Nathan." Her voice had gone rough, like fabric worn thin from too much love. "He was fascinated by hourglasses ever since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He used to ask me, 'Mama, if we flip it over, can we turn back time?'" She paused, drew a breath that seemed to cost her everything she had. "He passed 2 years ago. I keep his ashes in here so I can carry him with me. Everywhere I go, he goes too." She looked up, met Alaric's eyes. "His time stopped. Mine keeps on ticking. That is just how it is." The man with the gold watch had melted back into the crowd. The whispers had died completely. Grace was crying silently by the pillar, one hand pressed tight over her mouth, and Alaric stood there, his face drained of all color, his perfectly pressed suit suddenly looking like a costume that did not quite fit anymore. He swallowed. "Ma'am, I did not. I could not have known. No." Thulani said quietly, "You could not." She tucked the hourglass back against her heart, right where it belonged. "But that is not really the point, is it?" Alaric opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish pulled from water. "Nevertheless," he finally managed, his voice mechanical now, clinging to rules and regulations like a drowning man to driftwood. "You are not a registered guest. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Thulani nodded slowly, like she had expected nothing different. "All right." She turned toward the door. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows. catching the dust motes floating in the air, turning them to gold. Her shadow stretched long across the marble floor, the ivory and gray marble she had chosen with her own 2 hands as she walked. Unhurried, toward the exit. She had almost reached the door when a voice rang out from the direction of the elevator. "Stop right there." It was not loud, but it carried the kind of authority that does not need volume, the kind that comes from years of being obeyed. Everyone turned. A man stood in the elevator doorway. White hair, like fresh snow, gray suit, expensive but not flashy. Nothing ostentatious about him at all, but the way he held himself told you everything you needed to know about who was really in charge around here. "Mr. Ashford," Alaric's voice cracked right down the middle on the name. "Sir, I did not realize you were. I have been standing in that elevator since the young lady asked if this woman needed help." Leonard Ashford's eyes swept across the lobby like a cold November wind. "I heard every word. I saw everything." He stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, each one dropping the temperature in the room another degree. He stopped in front of Thulani, and then, to the shock of every soul watching, he bowed his head. "Thulani," he said softly, "it has been too long." "Leonard." She nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. 15 years. "I reckon, since Walter's funeral." Alaric felt the ground shifting beneath his polished shoes. His mouth had gone dry as dust. "Sir." His voice was barely a whisper now. Who is this woman?" Leonard Ashford, chairman of the board of the Valerius Corporation, turned to look at his hotel manager. And when he spoke, each word fell like a judge's gavel. "This woman." He pointed up at the portrait on the wall. At the young woman with dark hair and bright eyes standing beside Walter Valerius, both of them smiling like they had just discovered the secret to happiness. "Take a good long look at that painting, Mr. Mercer. Then take a good long look at who you just tried to throw out of her own hotel." Alaric looked up at the portrait, looked at Thulani. The same smile, the same eyes. 40 years apart, but unmistakable. His knees gave out. He went down hard on the cold marble, the impact shooting pain up through his legs, but he barely felt it. "No," he breathed. That cannot. Thulani Valerius." Leonard's voice rang out across the silent lobby. "Widow of Walter Valerius, co-founder of this hotel, and the majority owner of every single thing you see around you." The grandfather clock chimed again, marking the hour. And Alaric Mercer, who 5 minutes ago had stood like a king in his marble kingdom, knelt on the cold stone floor with his world crashing down around his ears. But Thulani was not looking at him. She was looking at his hands, still trembling. Trembling even harder now. And she found herself wondering not about revenge, not about justice, but about something else entirely. What was this man so terribly afraid of? My grandmother had another saying me was fond of, "The story ain't finished till kindness gets its turn." If this tale has touched something in your heart, I would be much obliged if you would share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Like my mama always said, a burden shared is a burden halved. Alaric's forehead touched the cold marble. The chill seeped through his skin, spread across his skull, settled somewhere behind his eyes. His knees throbbed against the hard floor. His lungs would not draw a full breath. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked on, each second landing like a small hammer against his temples. Above him, somewhere in the vast hush of the lobby, he could hear his own career crumbling, could almost smell it burning, mixing with the magnolia and the coffee and the lemon polish. "Mrs. Valerius, please? I did not know. I could not have known." The words tumbled out, tripping over each other like children running downhill. Pathetic, useless. He knew it even as he said them. Excuses from a man who had built his whole life on reading people at a glance, on knowing who mattered and who did not, and he had missed the one who mattered most of all. Thulani stood above him. She did not move, did not speak. The seconds stretched out like taffy. Alaric's shirt had gone damp beneath his suit jacket. A bead of sweat traced a slow path down his spine. Cold as a finger drawn by a ghost, his hands, pressed flat against the marble, shook so badly he could feel his wedding ring clicking against the stone. Click, click, click. The tiny sound seemed loud as gunshots in the silence. "Stand up!" Her voice came from somewhere far away. Quiet, not angry. Somehow, that made it worse. Alaric pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt borrowed, like they belonged to some other man. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, he expected fury, contempt, the cold satisfaction of someone about to end him. But Thulani was not looking at him the way a boss looks at an employee who has failed. She was looking at him the way his mother used to look when he came home with scraped knees and a lie sitting crooked on his tongue. She was looking at his hands, still trembling, still giving him away. "Your hands," she said softly. Not a question, an observation. Alaric shoved them into his pockets. Too late. Much too late. "They have been shaking since the moment you walked over to me." Thulani continued, her head tilted slightly, like a bird studying something curious. "Before you knew who I was. Before any of this happened." She took one step closer. The worn leather of her shoes whispered against the marble. "What are you so afraid of, Mr. Mercer?" The question hit him square in the chest, and somewhere deep in the pit of his stomach, beneath all the shame and the terror and the desperate scrambling, something cracked clean open. The lobby had emptied out like water draining from a tub. The guests had drifted away in ones and twos, some embarrassed, some just uncomfortable, none of them wanting to be caught staring at whatever was about to unfold. The security guards had retreated to their posts near the entrance, standing there like they were not quite sure what their job was anymore now that the woman they had been called to remove turned out to own the whole building. Leonard Ashford stood by the elevator, speaking low into his telephone. His voice was a murmur. Words Alaric could not make out from where he stood, and Thulani waited. She had not moved from her spot beneath Walter's portrait. The afternoon light had shifted, slanting through the tall windows at a lower angle now, casting longer shadows across the floor. The magnolia arrangement on the center table breathed its heavy sweetness into the still air. The grandfather clock ticked on, steady as a heartbeat, as a T. Alaric remained standing where she had told him to stand. His hands were out of his pockets now, nowhere left to hide them. "I asked you a question, Mr. Mercer." Her voice carried no threat, no accusation, just patience. The kind of patience that comes from having already survived the worst thing that could ever happen. Alaric's throat worked. He tried to swallow and found there was nothing left but dust. "I am not—" He stopped, started over. "It is nothing. Work stress. That is all it is. That is not what I asked you." She took another step toward him, close enough now that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the silver threads catching the light in her hair, the slight tremor in her own fingers as they pressed against the shape beneath her cardigan. The hourglass. Her son. She carried her dead child against her heart. And here she was asking him about fear. "Leonard," Thulani called without turning around. "His personnel file. I want to see it." Already pulling it up, Leonard walked over, his telephone still in hand, reading from the small screen. Alaric Mercer, 47 years old, 12 years with the Valerius. Performance reviews consistently excellent. No disciplinary actions on record. He paused, his brow furrowed. "There is a note here from last month. He requested a 3-month salary advance. The request was denied. Why did he need the advance?" Leonard scrolled down. Medical expenses. His son, 15 years old, paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident, 6 months ago. The words hung suspended in the air like dust motes in the slanting light. Thulani turned back to Alaric. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. Not the gray of embarrassment, not the pallor of shame. This was the gray of a man watching the last wall between himself and his private devastation come tumbling down brick by brick. "Your son," she said quietly, not a question. Alaric's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Ethan?" The name came out rough, scraped raw. "His name is Ethan. How much do you need?" "For the surgery." He shook his head. Once. Sharp, like a dog shaking off water. "That is not your concern. Mrs. Valerius, what I did today was wrong. I know that. If you want my resignation, you will have it on your desk within the hour, but my son is not part of this. He has got nothing to do with any of this." "Everything is part of this." Thulani reached up and pulled the hourglass from beneath her sweater. She held it up so the fading light could catch it, the gray ash inside shifting softly with the movement. 12 years ago, she said, my son Nathan nearly drowned in the swimming pool on the 3rd floor of this very hotel. He was 10 years old. He had snuck away from his nanny while she was answering the telephone. Nobody saw him go under. She turned the hourglass slowly in her hands. The ash settled and resettled. Nobody except a security guard, a young man, brand new on the job, working here barely 2 weeks. He did not know how to swim. Not a stroke. Alaric stood frozen. The clock ticked. The magnolias breathed. He jumped in anyway, pulled Nathan out, gave him mouth-to-mouth until the paramedics arrived. Thulani looked up from the hourglass. Her eyes found his. He never knew the boy he saved was the owner's son. Never asked for recognition or reward. He just did what needed doing and went home to his family. She set the hourglass down on the marble ledge beside her, right next to a small vase of white roses. Nathan lived for another 28 years because a stranger decided a child's life was worth risking his own. The lobby was silent except for the clock. I am not telling you this to make you feel better, Mr. Mercer. I am telling you because I need you to understand something. She stepped closer, close enough that Alaric could see the tears she was refusing to let fall, pooling along her lower lids like rain on a windowsill. There are people in this world who save lives without ever knowing they did it, and there are people who destroy lives without ever meaning to. Her eyes held his, did not let go. Today, you came within a hair's breadth of being the second kind, but you are not there yet, not quite. Alaric's breath snagged somewhere in his chest. I do not understand what you are saying to me. No, Thulani said softly. I reckon you do not, but you will. She turned to Leonard. How much would the surgery cost, the one his son needs? Leonard checked his telephone again. $300,000. Give or take. Approve the advance. The full amount, effective immediately. Alaric's knees nearly buckled again. He grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady himself. Mrs. Valerius, I cannot. I never asked you to. I know you did not ask. She picked up the hourglass and tucked it back into its place against her heart. That is precisely why I am offering. She began walking toward the seating area near the magnolia display, her worn leather shoes whispering against the stone. The velvet sofas there were deep burgundy, soft and worn from decades of use. But first, she said without looking back, you are going to sit down with me, and you are going to tell me about your boy. She lowered herself onto one of the sofas with the careful movements of someone whose joints did not cooperate the way they used to. And then I am going to tell you about mine. Alaric stood rooted to the spot. His mind was spinning like a compass near a magnet. His hands had finally stopped shaking, But something else had started up in its place. A pressure building behind his eyes, a crack forming in the wall he had been hiding behind for 6 long months. He looked at Leonard. The chairman nodded once. Permission granted. Or perhaps an order. Alaric walked toward the sofa on legs that felt like they might give out at any step. He sat down across from the woman he had tried to throw out of her own hotel, and for the first time since the night the hospital called, he opened his mouth to talk about the one thing he had sworn he would never discuss with anyone. But before he could speak, Thulani held up her hand. Wait! Her eyes had moved past him, toward the back of the lobby, toward the shadows by the service corridor. Grace! The young housekeeper stepped out from behind a marble pillar. Her face was wet, streaked with tears she had not bothered to wipe away. The stack of towels was gone. Her hands twisted together in front of her uniform like she was trying to wring water from them. Come here, child. Grace hesitated. Her feet seemed nailed to the floor. I said, come here. The girl walked forward on unsteady legs, her shoes making soft sounds on the marble. Thulani patted the cushion beside her. Sit down. Grace sat, and Alaric suddenly understood, with a clarity that made his stomach drop, that whatever was about to happen here was not just about him anymore. This woman with the hourglass full of ashes had something else in mind, something larger, something none of them could see yet. But what was it? Grace perched on the edge of the velvet cushion like a sparrow ready to take flight. Her hands would not stay still. They moved from her lap to the armrest to her lap again, fingers picking at the seams of her uniform. A loose thread had come undone near her left cuff. She twisted it around her index finger until the tip went white, then red, then white again. Thulani watched her. You stood up for me, the old woman said, even though it could have cost you everything you have. Grace's eyes dropped to the floor. The marble reflected the chandeliers above in fractured patterns, like stars scattered across dark water. I did not do much, ma'am. I just saw you standing there. You looked so lonesome, and nobody was lifting a finger to help. That is exactly what you did, child. You saw me. Thulani leaned back against the sofa. The velvet was cool through the thin wool of her cardigan. Somewhere in the distance, the percolator behind the reception desk gurgled and hissed. Most folks in this lobby today looked right through me like I was a smudge on the window glass. But you stopped. You asked if I needed anything. She paused. Why? Grace's fingers tightened on that loose thread. It snapped clean off. Because my grandmother looked like you. The words came out small, almost a whisper. Same silver hair, same way of standing, kinda tilted to one side like you were listening to something far away. She used to wear cardigans just like that one. Old ones, soft ones. She said new clothes never felt like home. Her voice cracked on the last word, splitting right down the middle. She passed 3 years ago this December. And I keep thinking, if she were somewhere alone, in a strange place, with folks looking at her like she did not belong. Grace pressed her lips together hard enough to turn them pale. I would want somebody to stop. I would want somebody to see her. The lobby fell quiet. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath between ticks. Alaric sat frozen in his chair, watching the exchange unfold. His own hands had finally gone still. The pressure behind his eyes had grown stronger, pushing outward, but he did not dare move. Did not dare make a sound. Something was happening here. Something beyond contracts and employment records and $300,000 advances. Leonard Ashford had drifted closer. He stood near the magnolia arrangement, his telephone forgotten in his hand. His face wore an expression Alaric had never seen on the chairman before in 12 years of working under him. Not the face of a businessman calculating angles. The face of a man paying attention. Really paying attention. What is your full name, child? Thulani asked. Grace, Grace Eleanor Mitchell, Eleanor. A small smile touched Thulani's lips, brief as a cloud shadow passing over a field. That was my mother's name. Grace looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wet. Your grandmother, Thulani continued. Tell me about her. What did she do before she passed? She was a housekeeper, ma'am. Same as me. Grace's chin lifted just a fraction of an inch. She worked at the Belmont Hotel over in Charleston for 37 years straight, never missed a single day until she took sick. 37 years? Yes, ma'am. And how long have you been working here at the Valerius? 11 months next Tuesday. Do you like it here? Grace hesitated. Her eyes flickered to Alaric, then away again, quick as a minnow darting through shallow water. It is a good job, ma'am. Pays better than most places. Benefits are decent. That is not what I asked you. The loose thread was gone now. Grace's fingers found the seam of her uniform instead, pressing into the fabric hard enough to leave marks. Honestly, ma'am. Honestly. No, I do not much like it here. Alaric flinched like he had been slapped. The work itself is fine, Grace continued, the words coming faster now, tumbling out like she had been holding them in too long. The guests are polite enough, most of them anyway, but there is something cold about this place, like it is all for show, like we are all just pretending to care about folks we never really bother to see. She gestured vaguely at the lobby around them, the crystal chandeliers throwing their expensive light, the marble floors gleaming like mirrors, the portrait of Walter Valerius smiling down from his gilded frame. It is beautiful, I reckon, pretty as a picture, but it does not feel like anywhere a person would actually want to come home to. The words hung in the air, mixing with the magnolia scent and the last of the afternoon light. Thulani nodded slowly. Her hand found the hourglass beneath her sweater and rested there. My son used to say the exact same thing. Grace blinked. Your son, ma'am, Nathan. The name came out soft as a prayer. He grew up running wild through this hotel, learned to walk on these very floors, used to hide behind those same curtains over there when we played hide and seek. Took me 20 minutes to find him once. He was so proud of himself he about busted his buttons. Her voice had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away and long ago. He loved this place. Lord knows he did, but he saw what it was turning into. Even back then, he used to tell me, Mama, when I am grown and running things, I am going to make the Valerius the warmest place in the whole wide world. Folks will walk through those doors and feel like they are finally home. She fell silent. Grace waited. Alaric waited. Leonard waited. The grandfather clock ticked on. He never got that chance, Thulani said at last. He died 2 years ago, come next month, and I ran away, tucked my tail, and ran. She looked around the lobby, at the gleaming surfaces that showed every fingerprint. The perfect floral arrangements that cost more than most folks made in a week. The staff in their pressed uniforms moving through the background like ghosts, seen but not noticed. I handed this place over to other people and told myself I could not stand to look at it anymore. Too many memories. Too much hurt. Her hand pressed flat against the hourglass through the worn wool. But the truth of it is, I was being a coward. I let my boy's dream wither on the vine because tending it was harder than walking away. Alaric felt something shift in his chest, like a door that had been stuck for years finally creaking open an inch. This woman had not come here to punish anyone. She had come to confess. Today was supposed to be simple. Thulani continued. I came to visit his portrait, say my goodbyes proper-like. It is the anniversary of his passing, and I thought maybe I was finally strong enough to let go. She shook her head, a small, weary movement. And then you showed me, Mr. Mercer, you showed me exactly what this place has become while I was off hiding from my own grief. Alaric opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out but air. You showed me a hotel where an old woman in a worn-out sweater gets treated like a criminal, where a young housekeeper has to risk her whole livelihood just to ask somebody if they need a hand, where the manager is so eaten up with his own fear and worry that he has forgotten how to see the human beings right in front of his face. Her eyes held his, steady as stone. You did not just shame me today, Mr. Mercer. You gave me something I did not even know I was looking for. What is that, ma'am? A reason to stop running. She stood up from the sofa. Her knees protested. Her back complained. But she rose straight and tall. Nathan wanted this place to feel like home to everyone who walked through those doors. He wanted kindness to matter more than appearances. He wanted the invisible folks to be seen. She looked between Alaric and Grace. I failed him once. I do not intend to fail him twice. Leonard stepped forward from his spot near the magnolias. Thulani, what are you planning to do? Call an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. And the agenda. Thulani looked at Alaric, then at Grace, then back at Leonard. I am taking my hotel back. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. And these two right here are going to help me rebuild it from the ground up. Grace's mouth fell open. No sound came out. Alaric stopped breathing entirely, and then Leonard's telephone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down at the screen. His face changed. The color slid right out of it. Thulani? What is it now? Somebody in the lobby earlier. They were recording what happened on their telephone. The whole thing. He turned the screen so she could see. A video. The lobby. Alaric pointing at her like she was something scraped off the bottom of his shoe. The security guards. The hourglass. All of it. Captured for the whole world to see. And by the look of the numbers at the bottom of the screen, half the city had already watched it. Thulani stared at the glowing rectangle in Leonard's hand, and for the first time since she had walked through those doors this afternoon, something that looked almost like fear flickered across her weathered face. The telephone screen glowed in the dimming lobby like a small, cold fire. Thulani watched the video play. Watched herself standing beneath Walter's portrait in her worn cardigan. Watched Alaric's finger jabbing toward her. Watched the security guards closing in like she was something dangerous that needed containing. The comments scrolled beneath the images. Hundreds of them. More appearing every second. This is disgraceful behavior. That manager should be fired on the spot. Who is this poor old woman? The Valerius Hotel ought to be ashamed of themselves. She handed the telephone back to Leonard. Turn it off. Thulani, we need to get ahead of this thing. The newspapers will be calling within the hour. If we do not put out a statement, I said turn it off, Leonard. His thumb found the button. The screen went dark. Thulani walked back to the sofa on legs that felt heavier than they had a moment ago. The weight of all those strangers watching her worst moment pressed down on her shoulders like a wet wool blanket. She could almost feel their eyes on her, thousands of them, staring at her through their little screens while they ate their suppers and waited for their shows to come on. She sat down. The velvet cushion sagged beneath her. Grace had not moved an inch. The young woman's face had gone pale as milk. Her eyes darted between Thulani and the darkened telephone like a rabbit caught between two foxes. Ma'am, I am so sorry. If I had known somebody was taking pictures, I would have tried to stop them. I would have. Why would you have stopped them? Grace blinked. Ma'am, what happened here today was wrong, child. Maybe the whole world ought to see it. But now everybody knows. Everybody saw you being treated like... She trailed off, unable to finish. Like a nobody. The word sat between them, heavy as a stone. Thulani reached up and touched the hourglass through her sweater. The familiar shape. The weight of Nathan resting against her heart where he belonged. I have been a nobody before. Grace. A long time ago. Before Walter. Before this hotel. Before any of it. She smiled. Just a little. Just at the corners. Being invisible is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. There are far worse fates than folks not seeing you. She turned her gaze to Alaric. He had not spoken a word since the video appeared on that screen. He sat rigid in his chair, his face the color of old newspaper left out in the rain. His hands gripped his knees so hard the tendons stood out like bridge cables. "Mr. Mercer!" His head snapped up like a puppet on a string. "Tell me about your boy." The words seemed to hit him somewhere soft. He flinched, drew back into himself. "Mrs. Valerius, I do not think this is the time. I am not asking what you think. I am asking you to tell me about Ethan." Silence. The grandfather clock ticked. The magnolias breathed their heavy sweetness into the air. The lobby had grown darker now. The automatic lights had not come on yet. They sat in the blue-gray twilight of early evening, shadows pooling in the corners like dark water. Alaric's jaw worked. Once, twice, like he was chewing on something he could not quite swallow. "He is 15. The words came out scraped and raw, like they were being dragged over gravel. He was coming home from basketball practice. The other driver ran a red light doing 50 in a 35 zone. His hands loosened slightly on his knees. The knuckles had gone white. "The doctors told me he was lucky. Can you imagine that lucky—" A sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. His spine was crushed between the fourth and fifth vertebrae, both legs paralyzed from the hip down. But he was lucky because he could still breathe on his own, and lucky because he still had brain function, and lucky because he did not die right there on the asphalt. Grace pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes had filled up again. My wife, past bringing him into this world. Alaric's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. Complications during the delivery. It has been just Ethan and me for 15 years. Just the two of us against everything. He stopped, swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed like a cork in rough water. There is a surgeon up in Boston, a specialist. He thinks he can restore partial function to Ethan's legs. Maybe more than partial, depending on how the nerves respond. But the procedure is experimental. The insurance company will not touch it. And the cost? $300,000? Yes, ma'am. And when the advance was denied, Alaric's eyes squeezed shut. The lids trembled. I started working double shifts. Every extra hour I could scrape together. I stopped eating lunch, stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night. I figured if I could just hold on long enough, if I could just keep grinding. His voice cracked clean in half. But it was never going to be enough. The numbers did not add up. They were never going to add up. And every single day, I had to look at my boy sitting in that wheelchair, looking back at me like I was supposed to have the answers, like I was supposed to fix everything the way I always had, and I could not do a blessed thing to help him. A single tear escaped down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. So I turned myself into this. He gestured at himself, at the pressed suit and the polished shoes and the cold efficiency he wore like armor. Hard as nails, cold as stone. Follow the rules. Protect the hotel. Do not let anybody see you bleeding. He looked up at Thulani. His eyes were red and wet. Because if I let myself feel anything, I was going to shatter into a million pieces. And if I shattered, who was going to take care of my boy? The lobby held its breath. Thulani nodded slowly. The shadows had crept further across the floor. The first evening stars were beginning to show through the tall windows. "So, you stopped seeing people?" Alaric blinked. "Ma'am, you stopped seeing them. The guests walking through these doors, the staff working alongside you, the old woman standing under the painting." She leaned forward, her eyes holding his like hands holding a face. "You turned them all into problems to be managed, obstacles to be cleared. Because if they were real people with their own hurts and their own stories, you might have to feel something, and you could not afford to feel—" Alaric stared at her. I am not excusing what you did here today, Thulani said, but I am starting to understand the why of it. She pushed herself up from the sofa. Her knees popped. Her back protested. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights beginning to flicker on against the darkening sky. My Walter used to have a saying. He would tell me, Thulani, hurt people, it is the way of the world. I never truly understood what he meant by that until this very afternoon. She turned back to face the room. You are not a cruel man, Mr. Mercer. You are a desperate one, and desperation will drive a person to do terrible things they would never dream of otherwise. Grace had started crying again, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, dripping off her chin onto her uniform. Alaric sat motionless in his chair. The tear on his face had dried to a faint salt track. His eyes were fixed on Thulani like she was the only solid thing left in a world that had turned to water. Why are you telling me all this? His voice came out as barely a whisper. Why do you even care I tried to throw you out of your own hotel? I shamed you in front of everybody. I deserve to lose my job. I deserve worse than that. Maybe you do. Thulani walked back toward him. Her worn shoes made soft sounds on the marble with each step. But I learned something a long time ago. Justice comes easy. Revenge comes easier still. Tearing somebody down does not take much effort at all. She stopped in front of his chair and looked down at him. The hard thing, Mr. Mercer, is building somebody back up. She extended her hand toward him, palm up, waiting. Alaric looked at that weathered hand, looked at the face above it. I do not understand what you want from me. I want you to take my hand. I want you to stand up on your own 2 feet. And I want you to help me turn this hotel into the place my son always dreamed it could be. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You cannot be serious about this. I am always serious. Mr. Mercer, Leonard will tell you, it is one of my less charming qualities. From across the lobby, Leonard nodded. She is telling the truth. I have never known her to joke about anything that mattered. Alaric shook his head slowly. After everything I did today, you want me to help you. I want you to have a reason to keep going that amounts to more than just survival. I want your son to see his father become something greater than a desperate man clinging to wreckage. Her hand remained extended, patient, steady, but mostly, Mr. Mercer, I want to prove to my own self that I have not forgotten how to see people either. The lobby held its breath. Alaric looked at the hand, at the woman it belonged to, at the choice being offered to him. He reached up, their fingers touched, and then Leonard's telephone buzzed again. He glanced down at the screen, and the color drained right out of his face. Thulani. What is it now? It is the hospital, the one where Nathan was treated before he died. They say they need to speak with you, tonight. It is urgent. Thulani's hand dropped from Alaric's grip. The hospital? Why on earth would they need to talk about Nathan now? He has been gone 2 years. Leonard pressed the telephone to his ear, listened. His face went very still, very careful. Thulani, what? They are saying there was an error in the original paperwork, in the autopsy report. The hourglass beneath her cardigan suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. What kind of error? Leonard looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in all the decades she had known him. They are saying Nathan's death may not have been an accident. The words hung in the air like smoke that would not clear. Not an accident. Thulani's hand flew to her chest. The hourglass, Nathan's ashes. She pressed so hard against the carved walnut frame that she could feel the edges cutting into her palm through the worn wool of her cardigan. What did you just say? Her voice came out wrong, too thin, too high, like a wire stretched past its limit. Leonard held the telephone away from his ear. His face had gone the color of old chalk left out in the rain. They need you to come in tonight. They would not explain the details over the telephone. Not an accident. Thulani repeated the words slowly, testing each one like a loose tooth. Nathan's death. Not an accident. The lobby seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The marble floor, the crystal chandeliers, the portrait of Walter smiling down at her, all of it sliding sideways like the deck of a ship in a storm. Grace jumped up from the sofa and caught Thulani's elbow just as her knees began to buckle. The old woman's weight shifted hard against the young housekeeper's shoulder. Ma'am, you need to sit down, please. Thulani let herself be guided back to the velvet cushion. Her hands would not stop moving. They fluttered against her cardigan, against the hourglass, against the fabric of the sofa like birds trapped behind glass. 2 years. The words came out fractured, broken into pieces. He has been gone 2 years. And now they tell me this. Now they say. She could not finish the sentence. Her throat had closed up tight as a fist. Alaric stood frozen beside his chair. The moment of connection between them had shattered like a dropped mirror. He did not know what to do with his hands, did not know where to look. This was so far beyond anything he had imagined when he woke up this morning. Leonard crossed the lobby in quick strides, his expensive shoes clicking sharp against the marble. He crouched down beside Thulani, his suit jacket pooling on the floor around him. I will drive you myself. We can leave right this minute. No. The word came out sharp, sudden, like a door slamming shut. Thulani looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw had set itself into something hard as the marble beneath their feet. No, she said again. Not yet. Thulani, if there is new information about Nathan, then it has waited 2 years already. It can wait 1 more hour. She pulled in a breath, let it out slowly through her nose. Her hands steadied, not completely, but enough. I came here today to say goodbye to my son, to stand beneath his daddy's portrait and finally let go of all the grief I have been carrying. She looked around the lobby, at the chandeliers throwing their cold, expensive light, at the magnolia arrangement breathing its heavy sweetness into the evening air, at the staff members hovering in the background, unsure whether to stay or go. And instead of peace, I found this, all of this. She gestured at Alaric, at Grace, at the darkened telephone where strangers had watched her humiliation spread across the world like spilled ink. I found a hotel that has forgotten what it was built to be. I found a young woman brave enough to risk everything for a stranger. I found a man so lost in his own desperation he could not see the human being standing right in front of him. She pressed her palm flat against the hourglass. Nathan always used to tell me there was no such thing as coincidence. He believed everything happened for a reason, even when we could not see what that reason was. Leonard stood up slowly. What are you saying? Thulani, I am saying that before I go to that hospital and find out what they have discovered about my boy, I need to finish what I started here tonight. She looked at Alaric. Sit back down. Mr. Mercer? He hesitated for just a heartbeat. Sit. He sat. Thulani turned to Grace. You, too, child. Stay where you are. Grace lowered herself back onto the sofa cushion, her hands twisted together in her lap like she was trying to pray but had forgotten the words. The lobby had grown fully dark now. The automatic lights finally triggered, flooding the space with warm amber that should have felt welcoming but somehow only made the shadows in the corners seem deeper. Leonard, Thulani said, tell the hospital I will be there in 2 hours, not a minute sooner. Thulani, 2 hours. Leonard. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, some old understanding from decades of trust. Then he nodded once, lifted the telephone back to his ear, and stepped away toward the reception desk. Thulani turned back to Alaric and Grace. I was about to tell you something before that call came through. Something about Nathan. About why I really came back to this place today after staying away so long. She reached beneath her cardigan and pulled out the hourglass, held it up so they could see it clearly in the new light. The ash inside was gray and fine as powder. It shifted gently as her hand trembled. This hourglass was a birthday gift. For Nathan's 30th birthday. I had it made special by an old craftsman up in Vermont who had been building them by hand for 60 years. Walter and I drove up there together to fetch it. Took us 2 days each way because Walter refused to take the highway. Said the back roads had better scenery. She turned the hourglass slowly in her weathered hands. Nathan loved these things ever since he was old enough to hold one. Something about the way the sand fell fascinated him. The idea that you could hold time itself in your 2 hands and watch it slip away, grain by grain. Her thumb traced the carved frame where decades of touching had worn the wood smooth. When he was 8 years old, he asked me a question I've never forgotten. He said, "Mama, when you flip an hourglass over, does the time run backward or does it just start fresh?" Grace made a small sound, almost a sob. She pressed her knuckles against her lips. I told him the time just starts over, that there is no going back. You can only begin again from where you stand. Thulani set the hourglass down on the cushion beside her, gentle as laying down a sleeping child. He thought about that for the longest while, just sat there turning it over in his little mind. And then he said something that cracked my heart clean in two. She paused, drew a breath that seemed to catch somewhere in her chest. He said, "That is all right, Mama. Starting over is good too. It means everybody always gets another chance." The magnolia scent hung heavy in the still air. The evening light pressed against the tall windows from outside. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded and faded away. Nathan died still believing that. Thulani continued. He died believing that people deserved second chances, that it was never too late to start fresh, that being kind to folks mattered more than sitting in judgment of them. She looked up at Alaric. "I stopped believing any of that the day I put him in the ground. I stopped believing in much of anything at all." Her voice had dropped lower now, rougher, like gravel shifting under tires. "I hid myself away. I let this hotel turn cold and hard because I was cold and hard and broken down to the bone. I told myself I was grieving, but the truth is, I was just giving up." She picked up the hourglass again, held it in both hands like something holy. "And then I walked through those doors today, and a young woman in a housekeeping uniform asked if I needed help. And a manager, drowning in his own private ocean of fear, tried to throw me out on the street. And standing there beneath Walter's portrait, I realized something." She flipped the hourglass over. The gray ash began to fall. Slowly. Grain by grain. The last remains of her only child marking time in the fading light. I realized that Nathan would have been ashamed of what I let this place become. And I realized he would have been ashamed of what I let myself become too. Alaric could not breathe. His lungs had forgotten how to work. Grace had tears streaming down her face, dripping off her chin, darkening the fabric of her uniform. Leonard stood by the reception desk with the telephone forgotten in his hand. Watching. "So here is what is going to happen," Thulani said. "Before I drive to that hospital and find out what they have learned about my son's death, I'm going to do something he would have wanted me to do." She looked at Alaric. "You are going to keep your position here, and you are going to get every cent of the money you need for Ethan's surgery. All of it. No conditions attached." He started to speak. She raised her hand to stop him. "I am not finished yet." She turned to Grace. "And you are going to college. Child. Hospitality management. I will pay for every last penny of it myself. And when you have that diploma in your hands, you are going to come back here to this hotel and help me rebuild it into the place Nathan dreamed it could be." Grace's mouth opened. No sound came out. Just air and disbelief. "Both of you are going to help me remember what kindness looks like, because I have been alone with my grief for too long, and somewhere along the way I forgot." She pushed herself to her feet. Her knees creaked. Her back protested, but she stood up straight and tall. Nathan used to say that hurt people, but he also said that healed people heal people. She looked between them. I am choosing to believe he was right. Even now. Even after everything. Leonard walked back over from the reception desk. Thulani, the car is ready whenever you are. She nodded slowly. Give me one more minute. She walked to the portrait of Walter, stood beneath it looking up at the face she had loved for 43 years, the face she still saw every night when she closed her eyes. Well, old friend, she whispered, too soft for anyone else to hear. I hope I am doing this the right way. I hope you and Nathan are watching from somewhere. I hope I am making you proud. Her voice caught like a thread on a nail. She pressed her palm flat against the wall beneath the painting. The plaster was cool and smooth against her skin. I hope I get the chance to see this through. She turned back to face the room. All right, Leonard, let us go find out what they know about my boy. She walked toward the door. Her worn leather shoes whispered against the marble with each step. Alaric and Grace sat frozen on the sofas, watching her go, and then Grace suddenly jumped to her feet. Wait! Thulani stopped, turned. Ma'am, Mrs. Valerius, there is something I need to tell you, before you leave. Thulani waited. The lobby waited. The grandfather clock ticked off the seconds. That video that everybody is watching, the one of what happened here today. Grace's face had gone pale. Her hands were shaking at her sides. I was looking at it while you were talking, reading what folks were saying in the comments underneath. And there is one comment that does not make any sense. It did not make any sense before, but now, with what the hospital just said about your son. Grace pulled her telephone from her uniform pocket. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the screen. This one right here. Somebody posted it right when the video first went up, before anybody knew who you were, before anybody knew anything about Nathan. She held up the screen. Thulani stepped closer, squinted at the small glowing letters. 8 words. Just 8 words. Posted by an account with no name and no picture. The air will fall before the leaves do. Thulani's face went the color of old bone. Leonard, I see it. Call the police, right now. The police, Thulani. What? Because whoever wrote that knew my son was going to die. Her voice had turned to ice, cold and sharp and dangerous. They knew 3 days before it happened. The comment glowed on Grace's telephone screen like a wound that would not close. 8 words. Posted 72 hours before Nathan Valerius drove his car off the Millbrook Bridge into the black water below. The air will fall before the leaves do. Thulani's hand shook as she took the telephone from Grace. The screen blurred and swam before her eyes. She blinked hard. Read the words again. They did not change. The username was nothing but a string of random numbers and letters. No photograph. No other posts. No trace of whoever had typed those 8 words and sent them out into the world like a stone dropped into still water. Leonard. Her voice did not sound like it belonged to her anymore. I see it. He was already dialing, his fingers moving across his own telephone. I am calling Detective Morrison right now. He was the one who handled the original investigation. The original investigation ruled it an accident. Thulani's fingers tightened around Grace's telephone until the plastic creaked. They told me Nathan lost control on the wet road. They told me there was nothing suspicious about any of it. They told me they were wrong. The word dropped into the silence like a hammer falling. Alaric had risen from the sofa without realizing it. He stood a few feet away, uncertain, his face a map of confusion and something else. something that looked almost like fear. "Mrs. Valerius, I do not understand. What does this mean?" Thulani looked at him. For a moment she seemed to have forgotten he was there at all, forgotten Grace, forgotten the lobby and the hotel and everything that had happened in the past 2 hours. "It means somebody knew." Her voice cracked down the middle like dry wood. "Somebody out there knew my boy was going to die, and they did not lift a single finger to stop it." She thrust the telephone back at Grace. "Save that comment, copy it down. Do whatever you need to do so it does not disappear." Grace's fingers flew across the screen, her hands trembling so badly she had to start over twice. Leonard had the telephone pressed against his ear, his jaw tight, his free hand balled into a fist at his side. "Detective Morrison, this is Leonard Ashford calling. I need you at the Valerius Hotel right away. We have new evidence in the Nathan Valerius case." A pause. Leonard's eyes narrowed. "I do not care if the case has been closed for 2 years. I do not care what the paperwork says. You need to see this for yourself. Tonight." He ended the call with a sharp tap of his thumb. "He is coming." Thulani nodded. She had not moved from her spot near the window. Her eyes were fixed on Walter's portrait, on the young woman standing beside him in the painting, on the ghost of who she used to be before grief hollowed her out like a rotted tree. 15 years, she said quietly. "I stayed away from this place for 15 years because I could not bear the memories, because every corner of this hotel reminded me of everything I had lost." She turned slowly. Her gaze swept across the lobby, the chandeliers, the marble, the magnolia arrangement breathing its heavy sweetness into the evening air. "And all that time, somebody out there knew the truth about how my son died. Somebody watched me grieve, watched me fall apart, watched me turn myself into a ghost." Her hand found the hourglass beneath her cardigan. "And they never said a word." Grace stepped forward, her face pale and strained in the lamplight. "Ma'am, maybe it is just a terrible coincidence. Maybe somebody made a lucky guess. Folks write all kinds of strange things on the internet these days. It does not necessarily mean the air will fall before the leaves do." Thulani repeated the words slowly, carefully, like handling shards of broken glass. "Nathan died on the 28th of October. 3 days after the first hard frost of the season, the leaves were still clinging to the trees." She looked at Grace, and her eyes were as hard as anything the young woman had ever seen. "That is not a lucky guess, child. That is a prophecy, and prophecies do not write themselves." The lobby doors swung open with a gust of cold November air. A man in a rumpled gray suit walked in, mid-50s, if that. Thinning hair combed across a freckled scalp, the kind of face that had seen too many crime scenes and not nearly enough sleep. He moved with the heavy tread of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything the world could throw at him. "Mrs. Valerius." Detective Morrison crossed the lobby in long strides, his shoes squeaking faintly against the marble. "Mr. Ashford says you have something I need to see." Thulani gestured at Grace. "Show him." Grace held up her telephone with both hands to keep it steady. Morrison took it from her, tilting the screen toward the light. His expression did not change as he read, not a flicker. "When was this posted?" "October 25th?" Grace said. 2 years ago, 3 days before. I know when Nathan Valerius died, young lady." Morrison scrolled down, tapped something, scrolled again, his lips pressed together into a thin line. "The account has been deleted, but you got the screenshot saved." "Yes, sir." "Good. I need you to send that to me, along with anything else in those comments that looks suspicious." He handed the telephone back and turned to Thulani. "Mrs. Valerius, I owe you an apology." She stiffened. "An apology for what? 2 years ago, when your son died, I was the one who signed off on the accident ruling. The evidence seemed straightforward. Wet road, high speed, no witnesses, no sign anybody had tampered with his car." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the pages soft and worn from years of use. But 6 months back, I got a telephone call from a forensic specialist over at the state crime lab. She had been going through old cases, using them to train new technicians. She found something in Nathan's file that we missed the first time around. Thulani's breath stopped in her throat. What did she find? Morrison flipped open the notebook. His eyes scanned the handwriting. Traces of a sedative in his blood. The original toxicology report flagged it as a prescription sleep aid, common enough medication, nothing that raised any red flags at the time. He looked up. But the specialist took a closer look. The concentration in his system was 3 times higher than any normal dose, 3 times what any doctor would have prescribed. The lobby fell silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hesitate between ticks. Your son was drugged, Mrs. Valerius. Before he got behind the wheel that night, before he drove onto that bridge. Thulani's knees buckled. This time, there was nobody close enough to catch her. She went down hard. Her palms slapped against the cold marble with a crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The impact shot pain up through her wrists, through her elbows, through her shoulders. The hourglass slipped from beneath her cardigan and skittered across the polished floor, spinning and sliding until it came to rest against the leg of a decorative table 10 feet away. Nathan's ashes, rolling away from her across the floor, she crawled toward it on her hands and knees. Her cardigan dragged through the dust and grime that had collected in the corners where the cleaning staff never quite reached. Her silver hair came loose from its ivory clip and fell across her face in tangled strings. The hem of her skirt caught on something and tore. Mrs. Valerius? Grace dropped to her knees beside her, reaching out. Do not touch me. The words came out raw, guttural, the sound of an animal in pain. Thulani reached the hourglass. Her fingers closed around it, clutching it against her chest so hard the carved edges dug into her palms. She could feel her heart pounding against the glass, against the ashes, against all that remained of her only child. Somebody killed him. The words were barely more than a whisper. Somebody drugged my boy and put him behind the wheel of his car and sent him out onto that bridge knowing full well he would never come back alive. She looked up at Morrison. Her face was wet with tears she had not even felt falling. Her clothes were smeared with the grime of a floor that had not been properly cleaned in weeks. Her cardigan, Nathan's last gift to her. The one she had worn every day since he died was stained with dust and filth. She looked exactly like what everyone in this lobby had assumed she was when she first walked through those doors. Nothing, nobody. A mess to be cleaned up and forgotten. Who did this? Morrison shook his head slowly. We do not have a name yet. The investigation is still ongoing. That is part of why the hospital reached out to you tonight. They found additional irregularities in the original autopsy report, signs that the medical examiner may have been influenced to overlook certain details. Influenced how? Bribed. Mrs. Valerius, we believe somebody paid good money to make sure the truth about your son's death stayed buried. Thulani laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of something breaking apart from the inside, something that had held together through 2 years of grief and guilt and unbearable loss, finally splitting at the seams. Bribed. She pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees were wet from whatever liquid had pooled on the marble. Her hands were gray with dust. The hem of her skirt hung torn and ragged. She looked like a woman who had lost everything, including her dignity. She looked like exactly what they had all seen. Somebody murdered my son. Her voice rose, filling the lobby, bouncing off the crystal and the marble and the portrait of Walter smiling down at them all. Somebody paid to cover it up, and for 2 years I have been walking around with his ashes pressed against my heart like a penance for a sin I did not even know had been committed. She turned to Leonard. Who? Thulani. I asked you a question. Who stands to gain from Nathan's death, who benefits from my boy being in the ground. Leonard's face had gone the color of old paper. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Morrison stepped forward, holding up one hand like a man trying to calm a frightened horse. "Mrs. Valerius, we have a suspect, but I need you to understand that the evidence at this point is circumstantial at best. We cannot make an arrest without something solid to— Tell me the name." "I really should not. Tell me." The word cracked across the lobby like a whip. Morrison looked at Leonard. Leonard looked at the floor. Neither man spoke. "Fine." Thulani's voice had gone cold now. Flat. Dangerous. "Then let me tell you what I already know." She pointed at the portrait on the wall. "When Walter died, he left controlling interest in this hotel to Nathan. 67% of the shares. The remaining 33% was split between the board members and one other family member. Walter's nephew." She looked at Leonard. "When Nathan died, those shares were supposed to come to me, but I was in no condition to manage anything. I was barely able to get out of bed in the morning. So, the board appointed a trustee to oversee Nathan's shares until I was ready to take them back." Her eyes had gone hard as flint. "Who did they appoint?" "Leonard, who has been controlling my son's inheritance for the past 2 years." Leonard's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Marcus," he said finally. "Marcus Valerius, Walter's nephew." Thulani nodded slowly. The name settled over the lobby like a shroud. "And if something were to happen to me, if I were to die without reclaiming those shares—" Morrison answered this time. His voice was heavy, reluctant. "According to the trust documents, Marcus Valerius would become the sole beneficiary. He would control 73% of the entire corporation." Thulani stood in the middle of the ruined lobby, her clothes filthy, her hair wild, her dignity in tatters on the marble floor, and she began to understand. "Marcus was at the funeral," she said quietly. "He stood right beside me, held my hand while they lowered Nathan into the ground, brought flowers to the grave every month for the first year." She looked up at the portrait of Walter, at the young woman with dark hair and bright eyes standing beside him. "He called me every Sunday for 6 months to make sure I was holding together." Her voice cracked. "And the whole time, he knew what he had done." Grace had pressed herself against the wall near the sofas, her face streaked with tears, her uniform spotted with the grime she had picked up helping Thulani off the floor. Alaric stood frozen by his chair, his hands hanging useless at his sides. Leonard had gone pale as milk. And Detective Morrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Mrs. Valerius, I think it is time we paid Mr. Marcus Valerius a visit." But before anyone could move, the elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed. The doors slid open, and Marcus Valerius stepped out into the light. Marcus Valerius walked out of the elevator like he owned the place. Which, Thulani realized with a cold twist in her stomach. He very nearly did. He was 53 years old, silver streaking through his temples. Charcoal suit cut so perfectly it might as well have been sewn directly onto his body. He had the kind of face that photographers loved and boardrooms trusted. Easy smile, warm eyes, the posture of a man who had never once in his life been told no. "Aunt Thulani," his voice carried across the marble lobby, rich with concern, dripping with warmth. "I saw the video online. I came as fast as I could. Are you all right?" He moved toward her with his arms already opening for an embrace, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor she had chosen with her own 2 hands 4 decades ago. Thulani did not move. She stood there in her filthy cardigan, her torn skirt, her wild hair hanging loose around her face. She stood there with Nathan's ashes pressed against her heart and the truth of what Marcus had done burning in her chest like acid. He reached for her. She stepped back. Marcus froze. His arms hung awkwardly in the air for a long moment before dropping slowly back to his sides. The smile on his face flickered like a candle in a draft. "Aunt Thulani, do not touch me." The words came out flat, cold, empty of anything that might be mistaken for warmth. Marcus blinked. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, then slid smoothly back into place like a mask being readjusted. Of course. You have been through a terrible ordeal tonight. I understand completely. He clasped his hands in front of him, the picture of patient concern. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you need, whenever you need it. Behind him, Morrison had faded back into the shadows near the elevator. His hand rested casually at his side, just a few inches from the handcuffs on his belt. Leonard stood motionless by the reception desk. His telephone was still in his hand, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus with an expression Thulani had never seen him wear before. Something cold, something calculating. Alaric and Grace had retreated to the far side of the lobby, watching from the shadows near the magnolia arrangement like two rabbits who had stumbled into a den of foxes. Thulani looked at the man who had murdered her son. She looked at his perfect suit and his perfect hair and his perfect performance of concern. And something cold and sharp settled into her bones, like winter settling into the ground. Tell me about the painting, Marcus. He blinked again, a tiny flicker of confusion crossing his face. The painting, Aunt Thulani. She pointed at the portrait of Walter hanging on the wall behind him. You were the one who commissioned it 30 years ago. I only just found that out tonight. Ah. Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the portrait, then back at her. His smile returned. Softer now, touched with nostalgia. Yes. A birthday gift for Uncle Walter. I wanted to surprise him with something special. Your signature's in the corner, hidden behind the frame where nobody would notice it. Is it? He laughed quietly, shaking his head. I had forgotten all about that. The artist insisted on it. Something about provenance and proper documentation. Thulani nodded slowly. Her fingers tightened around the hourglass. It is a beautiful painting. Walter loved it more than just about anything in this hotel. And Nathan used to stand right where you are standing now when he was just a little boy. He would look up at it and say it made him feel like his daddy was watching over him. Marcus's expression softened into something that looked almost like genuine grief. Nathan was a wonderful child, a wonderful man. I think about him every single day. Aunt Thulani, I miss him terribly. Do you? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus's smile flickered again. Something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation. A reassessment of the situation unfolding before him. Aunt Thulani, is something wrong? You seem different tonight. Not quite yourself. I am exactly myself. Marcus, for the first time in 2 years, I am exactly who I am supposed to be. She took a step toward him. Her ruined shoes scraped against the marble. I am taking back my hotel. I am taking back my company. I am taking back everything I handed away when Nathan died. Marcus's face went very still. The warmth drained out of his eyes like water running out of a tub. I see. Do you have a problem with that? Of course not. The smile was back, but it did not reach his eyes anymore. It is your company, your hotel, your decision to make. Good. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to smell his cologne. Something expensive. Something that tried too hard. Because I would hate to think that anybody in my own family might have a reason to object to my return. Silence fell over the lobby like a blanket dropped from a great height. Marcus stood frozen before her. His perfect composure had cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for her to see the thing underneath. A thin line of sweat had appeared at his temple, catching the light from the chandeliers above. Aunt Thulani, he said carefully, his voice measured and controlled. You have had a very traumatic experience tonight. Perhaps this is not the best time to be making major decisions about the future. Perhaps not. Maybe we should sit down tomorrow, when you have had a chance to rest, to think things through with a clear head. My head is perfectly clear, Marcus." She turned away from him, walked back toward the magnolia arrangement, toward the velvet sofas where this whole conversation had begun hours ago. The heavy sweetness of the flowers filled her lungs. "Do you want to know what I think about when I cannot sleep at night?" Marcus did not answer. His eyes tracked her across the lobby like a cat watching a bird. "I think about the last time I saw Nathan. The morning before he died, he came over to my house for breakfast, the way he did every Sunday. We made pancakes together. He burned the first batch because he was trying to flip them too high, showing off like he always did." Her voice had gone soft, distant, lost somewhere in the past. "He laughed that big laugh of his, the one that came straight up from his belly, and he said, 'Mama, I never could get the hang of pancakes.' And I told him, 'Baby, you never could get the hang of anything in the kitchen. You take after your daddy that way.'" She turned back to face Marcus. "That was the last thing I ever said to my son, a joke about burnt pancakes." And 3 hours later, he was at the bottom of the Millbrook River. Marcus swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed visibly in his throat. It was a terrible tragedy. Aunt Thulani, a terrible, terrible accident. Was it? The question landed like a slap. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean exactly what I said." Thulani walked toward him again, closer now, close enough to see the vein throbbing in his neck, the sweat beading at his hairline. "Was it really an accident, Marcus?" "Of course it was. What else could it possibly have been? I do not know. Why do you not tell me?" Marcus's jaw tightened. The mask was slipping now, cracking at the edges. "Aunt Thulani, I have no idea what you are trying to imply, but I can assure you, somebody drugged him." The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward, his polished shoe squeaking against the marble. "What? Somebody put enough sedatives into Nathan's system to knock out a horse. 3 times what any doctor would ever prescribe. I had no idea. Somebody paid off the medical examiner to keep it quiet? This is absolutely ridiculous. And somebody posted a message online 3 days before Nathan died, predicting exactly what was going to happen to him." Marcus's face had gone white. Not pale, white, the color of bone left out in the sun. "You cannot possibly believe that I do not believe anything yet, Marcus." Thulani's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "But I am starting to wonder." She reached up and pulled the hourglass from beneath her cardigan, held it up between them so he could see it clearly. The gray ash inside, the carved walnut frame worn smooth by years of touching. "You asked me earlier if I was all right. You want to know how I really am?" Marcus said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the hourglass. "I am standing in the middle of my own hotel looking like something the cat dragged in. My clothes are ruined. My dignity is in shreds. And I just found out that my only child might have been murdered by someone I have known and trusted for 30 years. She lowered the hourglass. "So, no, Marcus, I am not all right. I am about as far from all right as a person can get." The grandfather clock in the corner struck the hour. 9 chimes rang out across the silent lobby. Marcus stood motionless before her. His perfect suit, his perfect hair, his perfect composure, crumbling piece by piece like a dam giving way. "Aunt Thulani." His voice came out hoarse, strained. "You have to believe me. I loved Nathan. He was like a brother to me. I would never— Brothers had been killing each other since Cain and Abel. Marcus, I did not do this." "Then you will not mind answering some questions for Detective Morrison over there." Marcus's head snapped toward the shadows by the elevator. Morrison stepped forward into the light, his badge catching the glow from the chandeliers. "Mr. Valerius." Morrison's voice was flat, professional. "We need to have a conversation down at the station." "This is insane." Marcus's voice rose, cracking at the edges. I am being accused based on what some anonymous message on the internet, some wild theory about drugs and bribery. We have evidence, Mr. Valerius, forensic evidence, financial records, and a witness who is prepared to testify that you paid them to alter the autopsy report." Marcus's face went slack. Something behind his eyes broke loose and began to fall. That is not possible. I covered every—" He stopped. The words died in his throat, but it was too late. Everyone in the lobby had heard them. Thulani felt the air go out of her lungs. "You covered every what? Marcus?" He shook his head. His hands were trembling now, the way Alaric's had trembled hours ago. But this was different. This was the trembling of a man watching his entire world collapse around him. "I did not mean—" "I was not saying—" "You covered your tracks." Thulani's voice was quiet, deadly. "That is what you were about to say. Was it not you covered every track, paid off every witness, thought you had gotten away with murdering my son?" "No." Marcus's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "No, you do not understand. It was not supposed to happen like that." "Like what? He was not supposed to die." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. "The sedatives." Marcus's voice had gone high and thin. "They were only meant to make him sick, just sick enough to miss the board meeting, just sick enough to delay the vote on the expansion project." Thulani felt her knees begin to buckle. She grabbed the back of a nearby chair to keep herself upright. "I needed more time." The words poured out of Marcus now like water through a broken dam. The company was hemorrhaging money. The banks were calling in loans I could not cover. If Nathan had taken control when he was scheduled to, he would have found out about the shortfall. He would have discovered the money I had been borrowing from the trust fund. His shoulders sagged. His perfect posture crumbled. "It was only supposed to buy me 6 months, a year at most. I was going to pay it all back, every penny. Nobody was ever supposed to get hurt." He looked up at Thulani, and there were tears streaming down his face. Real tears. The same tears she had seen at Nathan's funeral. "I loved him, Aunt Thulani. I swear on everything I hold sacred. I loved Nathan like he was my own flesh and blood. And I killed him." The lobby fell absolutely silent. Morrison stepped forward with the handcuffs in his hand. "Marcus Valerius, you are under arrest for the murder of Nathan Valerius. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus did not resist as Morrison pulled his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs closing around his wrists echoed off the marble walls, off the crystal chandeliers, off the portrait of Walter Valerius smiling down at them all. Thulani watched them lead him toward the door. She watched his shoulders shaking with sobs. She watched the man who had murdered her son being taken away in chains. And she felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. No sense that justice had been served. Just emptiness. A vast, cold emptiness, where her heart used to be. Grace appeared at her elbow. The young woman's face was streaked with tears. "Mrs. Valerius, is there anything I can do?" Thulani looked at her, at this young stranger who had risked everything to show kindness to an old woman she did not know. "Yes, child, there is one thing. Name it." Thulani reached out and took Grace's hand in her own. The young woman's fingers were warm, alive, trembling slightly. "Help me remember why any of this matters." The lobby doors closed behind Morrison and his prisoner. The grandfather clock ticked on. And somewhere outside, in the darkness of the November night, a siren began to wail, but inside the lobby, Thulani heard something else, something that made her blood freeze in her veins. Leonard's telephone was ringing again. He answered it, listened, and his face went gray as ash. "Thulani." "What now?" "It is the hospital again, the medical examiner's office." "What do they want?" Leonard lowered the telephone slowly. They found something else in Nathan's file, something that changes everything. What could possibly change anything now? Leonard looked at her with eyes full of something she could not name. Nathan was not the only victim. Thulani. The sedative in his system matches 3 other unsolved deaths in the past 5 years. All of them connected to the Valerius Corporation. Thulani's hand flew to her chest, to the hourglass, to Nathan. Are you telling me that Marcus killed 4 people? Leonard's voice was barely a whisper, and Nathan was not the first. The siren faded into the distance, carrying Marcus Valerius away into the November night. Thulani stood in the middle of the lobby, her hand still pressed against the hourglass beneath her ruined cardigan. 4 victims. 4 people dead because one man could not face the consequences of his own greed. And Nathan, her beautiful boy, had been the last of them. The grandfather clock in the corner struck the half-hour, a single chime that seemed to hang in the air forever before fading into silence. Mrs. Valerius. Leonard's voice came from somewhere behind her. Soft. Careful. The voice you use when you are not sure if the person you are talking to might shatter at any moment. The police will need a statement from you, tonight, if possible, and the board will have questions in the morning. Thulani did not turn around. The board can wait. Of course, I only meant, I know what you meant, Leonard. She walked slowly toward the window. Her ruined shoes whispered against the marble with each step. Outside, the city lights glittered against the darkness like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere, out there, Marcus was being photographed and fingerprinted and locked into a cell where he would have nothing but time to think about what he had done. It should have felt like victory. It felt like nothing at all. Grace appeared at her elbow. The young woman had cleaned herself up somehow, wiped the worst of the grime from her uniform, pushed her hair back from her face, but her eyes were still red and swollen from crying. Ma'am, is there anything I can get for you? A glass of water? A cup of coffee? Thulani looked at her, really looked, at the tired eyes and the trembling hands and the stubborn set of her jaw. How old are you? Grace, 23. Ma'am, 24 in February. 23. Thulani shook her head slowly. Nathan was 23 when he told me he wanted to take over this hotel someday. He had all these plans, all these dreams about what this place could become. She turned back to the window. He wanted it to feel like home. That was what he kept saying. Not a business, not an investment, a home. A place where people could walk through those doors and feel like somebody actually cared whether they lived or died. Grace stood silent beside her, waiting. I let that dream die when I buried him. I handed this hotel over to strangers and ran away because staying here hurt too much. Thulani pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. And while I was hiding from my own grief, Marcus was out there killing people, covering his tracks, getting away with murder. Her breath fogged the window. She watched it fade. If I had stayed, if I had paid attention, maybe I would have seen what he was doing. Maybe I could have stopped him before Nathan ever got into that car. You cannot blame yourself for what he did, ma'am. I know that, child. Thulani turned to face her. I know it in my head. But knowing something and feeling it are 2 different animals entirely. From across the lobby, Alaric cleared his throat. He had been standing by the velvet sofas this whole time, silent as a shadow, watching everything unfold. His suit was rumpled now, his tie had come loose at the collar. He looked like a man who had been through a war and was not entirely sure which side had won. Mrs. Valerius. Thulani looked at him. What you said earlier, about the money for Ethan's surgery, about me helping you rebuild this hotel. He swallowed hard. Did you mean it? After everything that has happened tonight? Is that offer still on the table? Thulani studied him for a long moment. This man who had tried to throw her out on the street, who had threatened to have her arrested, who had looked right through her like she was not even there. This man who was also a father. A desperate, broken, terrified father who would do anything to save his son. "Yes," she said quietly. "I meant every word." Alaric's shoulders sagged. Something that had been holding him upright seemed to let go all at once. "I do not deserve this." "No, you probably do not. Then why?" Thulani walked toward him, her ruined shoes scraped against the marble. The magnolia arrangement breathed its heavy sweetness into the air between them. "Because my son believed that people deserved second chances. Because my husband taught me that tearing somebody down is easy, but building them back up takes real courage." She stopped in front of Alaric's chair. "And because I am tired of being the kind of person who gives up on folks just because they made a mistake," she held out her hand. "So, here is what is going to happen. Mr. Mercer, tomorrow morning, you are going to call that surgeon in Boston and schedule your son's operation. I will have Leonard release the funds first thing." Alaric stared at her hand like it might bite him. "And then what? And then you are going to help me turn this hotel into the place Nathan always wanted it to be. Not a palace for rich people to show off their fancy watches. A home. A place where everybody who walks through those doors feels like they matter." She waited. Alaric looked up at her. His eyes were red. His face was gray with exhaustion. But somewhere underneath all of that, something else was stirring. Something that might have been hope. He took her hand. "Thank you. Mrs. Valerius, do not thank me yet." Her grip was stronger than he expected. "This is going to be the hardest work you have ever done in your life. I am going to expect everything you have got, and then some." "Yes, ma'am. And if you ever treat another human being the way you treated me tonight, I will fire you so fast your head will spin. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear. Ma'am?" Thulani released his hand and turned to Grace. "Same goes for you. Young lady, the scholarship offer stands. Full tuition, room and board, books and supplies. Everything you need to get that hospitality degree." Grace's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, I cannot possibly accept—" "You can and you will." Thulani's voice was firm. "Your grandmother spent 37 years making other people's lives better. It is time somebody did the same for you." Grace opened her mouth to argue, closed it, opened it again. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes." "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Thulani nodded. She turned and walked back toward the portrait of Walter, her shadow stretching long across the marble floor in the lamplight. She stood beneath the painting and looked up at the face she had loved for 43 years. The kind eyes, the gentle smile, the way he had always looked at her like she was the most interesting person in any room. "Well, old friend," she whispered, "it has been quite a day." The portrait did not answer. It never did, but somehow, standing there in the quiet of the empty lobby, she could almost feel him beside her, almost hear his voice, soft and warm, telling her everything was going to be all right. "I found out who killed our boy." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I found out, and I watched them take him away in handcuffs, and I thought it would feel like justice. I thought it would make the hurting stop." She pressed her hand against the hourglass. "But it does not. Walter, it just feels empty. Like there's a hole inside me that nothing is ever going to fill." The grandfather clock ticked on. The magnolias breathed their heavy perfume into the still air. "So, I am going to do something else instead. I am going to take back this hotel. I am going to make it into the place Nathan always dreamed about. And I am going to help a couple of strangers who need somebody to believe in them." She smiled faintly. "It is not much, I know. It will not bring him back, but maybe it will mean something. Maybe it will matter to somebody." She lowered her hand from the portrait. "I hope you are proud of me, old friend. I hope Nathan is proud too." Leonard appeared at her shoulder. His telephone was finally silent. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were kind. "Thulani, the police will want to talk to you in the morning. I told them you needed tonight to rest." "Thank you, Leonard. Is there anything else you need? A car to take you home? Someone to stay with you tonight?" Thulani shook her head. "No, I think I'm going to stay here for a while. Just sit in the quiet and remember." Leonard nodded. He understood. "I will be in my office if you need anything." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did good tonight. Thulani, Walter would be proud." He walked away toward the elevators, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty lobby. Alaric and Grace had drifted toward the door, talking quietly between themselves. Two strangers who had met only hours ago, bound together now by something neither of them fully understood. Thulani watched them go. And then she was alone. She walked to the velvet sofa and sat down heavily. Her joints ached. Her back protested. Every bone in her body felt like it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. She pulled the hourglass from beneath her cardigan and held it in both hands. The gray ash inside had settled to the bottom, still and quiet, like Nathan himself in those last moments before he woke up and demanded breakfast and insisted on making pancakes even though he always burned them. "I miss you, baby," she whispered. "Every day, every hour, every minute." She turned the hourglass over. The ash began to fall, grain by grain, marking time in the silence. "But I'm going to keep going. I'm going to rebuild this place. I'm going to help those two young people find their way. And I am going to try to remember what you taught me about second chances and forgiveness and seeing the good in folks even when they make it hard." The ash continued to fall, slow and steady, like sand through an hourglass, like time itself, moving forward whether you wanted it to or not. "I cannot turn back the clock. Nathan, I cannot undo what happened, but maybe I can start over. Maybe that is enough." She set the hourglass down on the cushion beside her and leaned back against the velvet. The magnolia scent wrapped around her like a blanket. The amber light from the chandeliers was warm on her face. Outside, the November wind had picked up. She could hear it rattling the windows, pushing against the walls of this old hotel that had seen so much joy and so much sorrow over the years. But inside, in the quiet of the empty lobby, something else was stirring. Something that felt almost like peace. Thulani closed her eyes. Tomorrow, there would be police interviews and board meetings and 1,000 difficult decisions to make. Tomorrow, she would have to face the reality of what Marcus had done, not just to Nathan, but to 3 other innocent people whose names she did not even know yet. But tonight, she was going to sit here in the home her husband had built, surrounded by the memories of everyone she had loved and lost, and she was going to rest. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking the hour, and Thulani Valerius, 72 years old, owner of a hotel and keeper of ashes, finally allowed herself to cry. Not tears of grief this time, not tears of anger or shock or despair, just tears. The kind that come when you have been holding on too tight for too long, and something inside you finally lets go. She cried for Nathan, for Walter, for the years she had wasted hiding from her own pain. And when the tears finally stopped, she opened her eyes and looked around the empty lobby. The marble floor she had chosen with her own 2 hands, the portrait of Walter smiling down at her, the magnolia arrangement breathing its sweetness into the night air. Home. After all this time, she had finally come home. She reached out and picked up the hourglass, turned it over one more time, watched the ash begin its slow descent. "All right, Nathan," she said softly. "Let us start over. You know, I have been telling stories for a long time now, and every once in a while, one comes along that stays with me, that keeps me up at night, that makes me think about the folks I pass on the street without really seeing them. Thulani's story is one of those. Not because of the money, not because of the revenge, not even because justice was finally served. It stays with me because of grace. That young housekeeper who risked everything just to ask an old woman if she needed help. Because of Alaric, who was so busy drowning in his own fear that he forgot how to see anyone else. Because of the simple truth that we are all just one bad day away from becoming invisible. My mother used to say that kindness is the rent we pay for the space we take up in this world. I think she was right. So, here is my question for you. Friend, when was the last time you really saw someone, not their clothes, not their car, not their job title, just them? The lobby no longer felt like a stage. The marble, the chandeliers, the portrait on the wall, all of it seemed to fade into the background. What remained was quieter, heavier, real. Thulani stood there holding the hourglass close, the weight of it familiar against her chest. Time was still moving, slowly, unforgivingly, but, for the first time in a long while, it did not feel like it was running away from her. Many of us carry something like that. A grief wrapped so carefully it looks invisible from the outside. A moment where everything changed. Yet the world kept asking us to stand up straight and keep going. Many of us know what it is to be unseen, to be misunderstood, to be judged at the worst possible moment. Nothing here needed to be settled tonight. Not the past, not the truth, not the future, waiting just beyond the doors. It was enough to let the air grow still, to let the story pause without forcing it to explain itself. Some things are allowed to remain unresolved. Some endings are allowed to rest where they are. Thank you for staying with this story. Thank you for listening, and for holding it gently.